Welcome to Nidra Narratives. Before you drift off, if you're enjoying the series, a like and a comment means the world. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Founding of a Kingdom. When the Deccan broke free. Tonight, we travel to a time when a single act of rebellion created a kingdom that would shape the destiny of millions. When a man whose origins remained shrouded in legend dared to sever the bonds of empire and forge something entirely new. In the year 1347, as plague swept across Europe and the old certainties of the medieval world began to crumble, a transformation was taking place in the heart of India that would echo through the centuries. How did a merchant from Persia become the most powerful man in the Deccan? What drove ordinary farmers to become legendary warriors? And how did the collision of cultures, Persian and Indian, Hindu and Muslim, create a civilization of extraordinary beauty and terrible violence? Let us travel back together to the black cotton soil of the Deccan Plateau, where the story of the Maratha people truly begins. The Deccan Plateau stretches across the southern portion of the Indian subcontinent like a great triangular shield, bounded by mountain ranges on three sides and opening to the northern plains. The name itself comes from the Sanskrit word for south, and to stand upon this land is to feel its ancient weight beneath your feet. The soil here is black and rich, formed from volcanic basalt laid down millions of years ago. And when the monsoon rains come sweeping in from the Arabian Sea, the earth releases a scent of wet loam that rises like incense toward the heavens. This is a land of extremes, scorching summers when the sun beats down upon bare rock, and monsoon seasons when rivers swell and overflow their banks, and cool winters when the air carries the distant call of peacocks echoing across the plateau. In the year 1347, this land was in turmoil. The Delhi Sultanate, that vast northern empire ruled by the erratic Muhammad bin Tughlaq, had stretched itself to the breaking point. The Sultan had, in the previous decades, attempted something extraordinary and disastrous. He had forced thousands of his subjects to migrate from Delhi to Dolatabad in the Deccan, hoping to create a second capital that would anchor his control over the south. The migration had been a catastrophe. Thousands died on the journey, and those who survived found themselves in an unfamiliar land, far from their homes and resentful of the distant authority that had uprooted them. But from this catastrophe emerged opportunity. The administrators, soldiers, merchants, and scholars who had been transplanted to the Deccan began to put down roots. They married local women, learned local languages, adapted to local customs. And as Muhammad bin Tughlaq's grip on power weakened, his treasury depleted by failed schemes, his nobles alienated by punitive taxation, these transplanted northerners began to imagine a different future, one in which they might rule themselves. Among these men was one whose origins remained shrouded in the mists of legend and scholarly debate. Hassan Gangu, as he was known, had risen through the ranks of the Tughlaq administration to become a commander of considerable standing. Some chronicles suggest he was of Afghan origin, others claim Persian ancestry, and a charming legend holds that he had once been the servant of a Brahmin named Gangu, whose kindness he never forgot, hence the name Bahmani, a corruption of Brahmin. Whatever his origins, Hassan Gangu possessed that rare combination of military prowess, political acumen, and personal charisma that marks the founders of dynasties. The immediate catalyst for rebellion came in the form of widespread discontent among the Deccani nobles. The military commanders who had been stationed in the south and who chafed under the distant authority of Delhi. In 1345, a noble named Ismail Muk led an initial uprising, and the rebels placed him on the throne at Dowlatabad. But Ismail Muk, recognizing perhaps that he lacked the qualities necessary to sustain an independent kingdom, made a decision that would prove fateful. he abdicated in favor of Hasan Gangu. On the 3rd of August, 1347, in a ceremony that marked the formal severance of the Deccan from Delhi's authority, Hasan Gangu was crowned with the title Alauddin Bahman Shah Sultan, founder of the Bahmani dynasty. The influential Chishti Sufi sheikhs of the region, those mystics who taught that divine love transcended the boundaries between faiths, lent their spiritual sanction to this new sovereignty, their support crucial in legitimizing the rebellion in the eyes of the Muslim faithful. The new sultan established his capital at Hassanabad, which we know today as Gulbarga, and it was here that the first coins of the Bahmani realm were minted, their rhythmic clinking a tangible symbol of a new political order. To place this moment in global context, while Hasan Gangu was establishing his sultanate, Europe was reeling from the Black Death, which had arrived the previous year and would eventually kill between 25 and 30 million people, perhaps half the continent's population. The same trade networks that connected the Deccan to the wider Islamic world, the maritime routes across the Indian Ocean, the overland Silk Road caravans, had also carried the plague from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. In England and France, the 100 Years' War was entering a new phase, with Edward III besieging Calais. The Yuan dynasty in China was entering its final decades to be replaced by the Ming in 1368. The 14th century was an age of upheaval across the globe, and the founding of the Bahmani Sultanate was part of this broader pattern of transformation. The kingdom that Alauddin Bahman Shah carved out was no modest principality. By the end of his reign in 1358, the Bahmani Sultanate stretched from the Wainganga River in the north to the Krishna River in the south, from Bongir in the east to Daulatabad in the west. This was a realm that encompassed the black soil plains of the Deccan, the forested Ghats of the western mountains, and the fertile river valleys that would sustain its economy. The Sultan divided his kingdom into 4 provinces, each governed by a provincial governor who wielded considerable autonomy, a system that would prove both a strength and, eventually, a fatal weakness. The early Bahmani sultans faced a fundamental challenge that would define their entire history. They were a Muslim minority ruling over a predominantly Hindu population, dependent on the acquiescence of local communities and the expertise of Hindu administrators. This reality necessitated a pragmatic approach to governance. The Bahmani sultans, from the very beginning, encouraged a fusion of Deccan cultures, drawing upon Persian administrative traditions while accommodating local practices. Hindu officials served in the revenue administration, and the sultans maintained a delicate balance between asserting Islamic authority and ensuring the cooperation of their Hindu subjects. Yet the Bahmani Sultanate was born into a world of conflict. To the south lay the Vijayanagara Empire, that great Hindu kingdom founded just 11 years earlier in 1336, which would become the Bahmani's perpetual rival. The two powers would clash repeatedly over the Raichur Doab, that fertile tract of land between the Krishna and Tungabhadra rivers, in a struggle that would continue for over 2 centuries. These wars were not merely territorial disputes. They represented a fundamental contest for supremacy in the Deccan, a struggle that would shape the political, military, and cultural development of both kingdoms. As the years passed and the Bahmani Sultanate consolidated its power, a distinctive civilization began to emerge in the Deccan. The Persianate culture that the Bahmanis cultivated, with Persian as the language of administration and high culture, with architectural styles that blended Central Asian, Persian, and Indian elements, would leave an indelible mark on the region. The Dakhni language, that distinctive blend of Hindi, Persian, Arabic, and local Dravidian elements, began to emerge as the vernacular of the Deccan's Muslim population, a linguistic testament to the cultural fusion taking place. In the capital of Gulbarga, the sounds of this new civilization could be heard from dawn to dusk. The muezzin's call to prayer rose from the minarets of the great Jami Masjid, a mosque unique among Indian mosques because its entire prayer hall was covered by a series of domes, with no open courtyard, an adaptation to the fierce Deccan sun that provided worshippers with shade throughout the day. The tap-tap-tap of hammers on copper and brass rang out from the metalworkers' quarter, where craftsmen were beginning to develop the distinctive metalware that would eventually be known as bidriware. The clatter of looms filled the textile quarter, where weavers produced cotton cloth that would be traded as far as Persia and Arabia. And in the Khanqa of Khwaja Bandanawaz Gesu Daraz, the great Chishti Sufi who had made Gulbarga his home, the sounds of devotion never ceased. The murmur of disciples reciting the names of God, the rustle of pages as scholars studied the saints' treatises on mystical love, the occasional burst of sama, the devotional music that was central to Chishti practice, all blended into a soundscape of spiritual seeking that transcended the boundaries between faiths. The Deccan Cauldron had begun to simmer, and the ingredients that would eventually produce the Maratha Empire were already present. The administrative structures, the military traditions, the cultural synthesis, the endemic warfare that would train generations of warriors in the arts of combat and survival. But all of this lay in the future. For now, as the sun set over the ramparts of Gulbarga on that August day in 1347, the Bahmani Sultanate was young and full of promise, and few could have imagined the transformations that were yet to come. Chapter 2. The Persian Merchant Who Built an Empire. Mahmud Gawan's Rise and Fall. More than a century had passed since Hassan Gangu had proclaimed himself Sultan, and the Bahmani kingdom had grown into one of the most powerful states in the Indian subcontinent. The capital had shifted from Gulbarga to Bidar, a city of cool stone corridors and elaborate fortifications, where courtiers gathered in whispered conspiracy and the scent of attar perfume drifted through palace chambers. It was into this world of intrigue and ambition that a Persian merchant arrived in 1453, a man whose genius would bring the Sultanate to its greatest territorial extent and whose tragic death would set in motion its eventual collapse. Mahmud Gawan was born in 1411 in the village of Gawan, in the region of Gilan in northern Persia, to a family that had produced viziers and ministers for local rulers. From his earliest years, he displayed the intellectual gifts that would later make him famous. A mastery of Islamic theology, fluency in Persian prose and poetry, and a keen understanding of the sciences. But political intrigues in his homeland forced his family from power, and at the age of 42, Mahmud Gawan set out on a journey that would take him to the Deccan. He arrived at the Bahmani court as a merchant, one of many Persian traders who had been drawn to the Deccan by its prosperity and its connections to the wider Islamic world. But Mahmud Gawan was no ordinary merchant. His learning, his eloquence, and his evident administrative abilities quickly caught the attention of Sultan Ahmad Shah II, who appointed him a noble and gave him command of 1,000 cavalrymen. This was the beginning of an ascent that would see Mahmud Gawan rise to become the most powerful minister in Bahmani history. When Humayun Shah came to the throne in 1458, he recognized in Mahmud Gawan the qualities of a true statesman. The Sultan appointed him chief minister and bestowed upon him the title Prince of Merchants. In his accession speech, Humayun Shah declared that he had chosen Mahmud because he was one who should be clothed with the outward attributes of truth and good faith, and who should inwardly be free from vices and vanity. It was a remarkable tribute to a foreign-born merchant, and it marked the beginning of Mahmud Gawan's transformation of the Bahmani state. The challenges facing the Sultanate were formidable. The kingdom was perpetually at war with its neighbours, the Vijayanagara Empire to the south, the Gajapati rulers of Orissa to the east, and the Sultanates of Malwa and Gujarat to the north. Internally, the administration was plagued by corruption. The provinces were becoming increasingly autonomous, and the nobility was riven by a bitter factional struggle between two groups. The Deccanese, who were the descendants of earlier Muslim settlers and local converts, and the Afakis, or newcomers, who were recent arrivals from Persia, Central Asia, and the Arab lands. Mahmud Gawan addressed these challenges with a comprehensive program of reform that touched every aspect of the Sultanates' administration. He divided the existing 4 provinces into 8, reducing the power of individual governors and making them more accountable to the central authority. He limited each provincial governor's control to a single fort, with all other fortifications in the province coming directly under the Sultan's authority. He introduced a system of measurement and valuation of agricultural land, creating a more equitable and efficient revenue system. And he established a large block of crown land within each province, ensuring that the Sultan would always have resources independent of the nobility. To place these reforms in global context, while Mahmud Gawan was centralizing the Bahmani state, similar processes were underway in Europe. In France, Louis XI was systematically reducing the power of the great feudal nobles, bringing more territory under direct royal control. In England, Edward IV was doing much the same, though the Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war between rival claimants to the throne, would complicate English state building for another generation. The challenge Mahmud Gawan faced, how to create a more effective, centralized state in the face of entrenched local interests and factional rivalries, was fundamentally similar to what European monarchs confronted in the same era. Mahmud Gawan's military campaigns were equally impressive. Under his leadership, the Bahmani Sultanate reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. He annexed the Konkan coast, securing the vital port of Goa and establishing Bahmani control over the lucrative maritime trade. He campaigned successfully against the Gajapati rulers of Orissa, pushing the Sultanate's eastern frontier to its furthest extent. And he maintained the pressure on Vijayanagara, though he was wise enough to recognize that a permanent victory over that powerful kingdom was beyond the Sultanate's reach. But Mahmud Gawan was more than a soldier and administrator. He was a man of profound learning and cultural refinement, whose correspondence with the rulers of the Ottoman Empire, the Timurid courts of Central Asia, and the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt testifies to his international reputation. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, addressed him as spreader of the board of kindness and goodness, the right hand of the Bahmani state, trustee of the religion of Muhammad. This was no mere diplomatic courtesy. It reflected genuine respect for Mahmud Gawan's achievements. In 1472, Mahmud Gawan founded the great madrasa in Bidar that still bears his name, a college for the study of Islamic theology, law, and related subjects, modelled on the great colleges of Persia. This magnificent institution, with its graceful minarets and elaborate tilework gleaming in the afternoon sun, was designed to be a centre of Islamic learning for the entire Deccan. The rustle of Persian manuscripts in the madrasa's library, the murmur of students reciting their lessons, the scratch of quills on paper, these were the sounds of knowledge being preserved and transmitted, of civilization being built brick by brick and word by word. Mahmud Gawan spent his personal fortune on this institution, for though he was immensely wealthy from his trading activities, he lived with remarkable simplicity and devoted his resources to education and public works. Yet for all his achievements, Mahmud Gawan could not escape the factional politics that had plagued the Bahmani court for generations. The Deccani nobles, led by Nizam-ul-Mulk Bari, resented the power of this Persian newcomer and the reforms that had curtailed their own authority. They fabricated a treasonous letter, purportedly from Mahmud Gawan to the ruler of Orissa, and presented it to the young Sultan Muhammad Shah III. The Sultan, perhaps influenced by drink and certainly manipulated by the conspirators, ordered Mahmud Gawan's execution. On the 5th of April 1481, Mahmud Gawan was put to death. He was 70 years old, and he had served the Bahmani sultans for 23 years. The chronicles report that Muhammad Shah III almost immediately regretted his decision, and that he died the following year consumed by grief over his error. Some sources claim that he was haunted by visions of Mahmud Gawan in his final days, screaming on his deathbed that he was being killed by the man he had wrongly executed. The timing of this tragedy resonates with events unfolding across the globe. Just 6 weeks before Mahmud Gawan's execution, the first victims of the Spanish Inquisition had been burned alive in Seville. While Mahmud Gawan, a Persian Muslim, had worked to balance the competing claims of Deccani and foreign nobles, of Hindu and Muslim subjects, in the service of a more effective and just administration. The Spanish monarchy was embarking on a program of religious uniformity that would impoverish Spain intellectually and economically for generations. The year 1481 also fell as the Italian Renaissance was reaching its zenith. In Florence, Lorenzo de' Medici was at the height of his power, patron of artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo. The Mahmud Gawan Madrasa, completed in 1472, was conceived in the same spirit as the great libraries and academies of Renaissance Italy, as a centre of learning that would attract the best minds and preserve the accumulated wisdom of civilization. The execution of Mahmud Gawan marked the beginning of the end for the Bahmani Sultanate. The reforms he had implemented were abandoned, the factional strife intensified, and within a decade, the Sultanate had begun to fragment. The tragedy illuminates a fundamental truth about the Deccan Sultanates, that the ethnic and sectarian divisions within the Muslim elite were as significant as any external threat. The struggle between Deccanese and Afakis, between Sunnis and Shias, between those who spoke Dakhni and those who favoured Persian. These internal conflicts would continue to shape the politics of the successor states and would ultimately create the conditions in which the Maratha people would rise to power. As the sun set over Bidar on that April evening in 1481, the Bahmani Sultanate stood at a crossroads. The greatest administrator it had ever known lay dead, victim of the very factionalism he had spent his life trying to overcome. The reforms that might have preserved the Sultanate had been undone by court intrigue, and in the years to come, the kingdom that Hassan Gangu had founded would shatter into fragments, each fragment becoming a kingdom in its own right, each kingdom contributing to the complex, violent, and culturally brilliant world of the Deccan Sultanates. Chapter 3: The Shattering. 5 Sultanates and the Fall of Vijayanagara. The death of Mahmud Gawan had unleashed forces that the weakened Bahmani sultans could no longer control. Within a decade, the great sultanate that had dominated the Deccan for nearly a century and a half began to dissolve, its provinces transforming into independent kingdoms under ambitious governors who saw opportunity in the chaos. By 1518, the Bahmani Sultanate existed only in name, and 5 successor states had emerged to contest for supremacy in the Deccan: Ahmadnagar, Bijapur, Golconda, Berar, and Bidar. This fragmentation would reshape the political landscape of southern India and set the stage for one of the most consequential battles in Indian history. The first to declare independence was Malik Ahmad Nizam Shah I, who established the Ahmadnagar Sultanate in 1490. His father, Nizam-ul-Mulk Bari, had been the very man who had engineered Mahmud Gawan's downfall, and the son inherited both his father's ambition and his position as leader of the Deccani faction. In the same year, Yusuf Adil Shah declared the independence of Bijapur. The origins of this founder are shrouded in legend. Some sources claim he was a Georgian slave purchased by Mahmud Gawan himself. Others assert he was a son of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II, sent to India to escape fratricidal succession struggles. Whatever his origins, Yusuf Adil Shah proved to be a ruler of considerable ability, and he proclaimed Shia Islam as the official religion of his kingdom in 1503, a decision that would have profound implications for the religious politics of the Deccan. The other successor states followed in quick succession. Berar became independent under Fathullah Imad ul-Mulk in 1490, though it would later be absorbed by Ahmadnagar. Bidar, the former Bahmani capital, became independent around 1492 under the Barid Shahi dynasty, and Golconda in the southeastern Deccan emerged as an independent sultanate in 1512 under Sultan Kuli Qutb Shah, a Turkish commander who had served under Mahmud Gawan. The Qutb Shahi dynasty would rule Golconda for nearly 2 centuries, founding the city of Hyderabad and presiding over a kingdom famous for its diamond mines and its cosmopolitan culture. These 5 sultanates, collectively known as the Deccan Sultanates, were bound together by their common origin in the Bahmani fragmentation, their shared Persianate culture, and their complex relationships of rivalry and alliance. They fought each other constantly, forming and breaking alliances with bewildering frequency. Yet they also faced a common challenge. The Vijayanagara Empire to the south, that great Hindu kingdom that had been the Bahmanis' perpetual rival and that now confronted the divided sultanates with its formidable military power. By the mid-16th century, the Vijayanagara Empire had reached the zenith of its power under the de facto rule of Aliya Rama Raya. Though the nominal emperor was Sadasiva Raya, real power lay in the hands of this elderly but formidable regent, who had skillfully exploited the divisions among the Deccan Sultanates to expand Vijayanagara's influence. Rama Raya played the Sultanates against each other, intervening in their internal disputes, demanding territorial concessions, and treating their rulers with a condescension that bred deep resentment. The breaking point came in the early 1560s. Rama Raya's aggressive diplomacy, his seizure of strategic fortresses, and his insulting treatment of the sultans finally drove the divided sultanates to unite against their common enemy. In a remarkable display of diplomatic skill, the 4 major sultanates, Ahmadnagar, Bijapur, Golconda, and Bidar, set aside their differences and formed a grand alliance. Marital diplomacy cemented the coalition, with marriages between the ruling families creating bonds that transcended their previous rivalries. On the 23rd of January, 1565, the armies met near the village of Talikota, close to the Krishna River. The Sultanate's superior artillery proved decisive. Rama Raya was captured and executed, and his forces withdrew from the field. His brother Tirumala fled to the capital with the royal treasury, loaded onto 1,550 elephants, but made no attempt to defend the city. The Sultanate forces entered Vijayanagara. The city was abandoned, and the empire never recovered its former position. To place this loss in global context, the Battle of Talikota in 1565 came just 3 years before the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule began. The Council of Trent had concluded in 1563, and enforcement of its decrees was provoking resistance in the Spanish Netherlands. The abandonment of Vijayanagara was comparable in cultural significance to the sack of Rome in 1527 or the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a profound loss to world civilization. The city's population may have exceeded 500,000, making it one of the largest urban centres in the world at the time. The Portuguese chronicler Domingo Paes, who had visited Vijayanagara in the 1520s, had described it as the best provided city in the world. Now its temples stood silent against the sky, its palaces empty, its markets still. The Battle of Talikota permanently reconfigured Deccan politics. The Vijayanagara Empire, though it lingered on for another century under the Aravidu dynasty, never recovered its former glory. The Bijapur Sultanate reaped the greatest territorial gains, expanding southward into the former Vijayanagara territories. But the alliance that had won the battle did not long survive the victory, and the Sultanates soon returned to their habitual pattern of mutual warfare. The religious framing of the Battle of Talikota as a conflict between Hindu and Muslim kingdoms requires careful contextualization. While it is true that Vijayanagara was ruled by Hindu kings and the Deccan Sultanates by Muslim sultans, the reality was far more complex. Vijayanagara employed Muslim commanders and soldiers. The Sultanates employed Hindu administrators and revenue officials. Rama Raya himself had cultivated close relationships with several of the sultans, intervening in their internal disputes and even supporting one sultanate against another. The alliance that defeated him at Talikota was motivated as much by political calculation, the recognition that Rama Raya's divide and rule strategy threatened all of them, as by religious solidarity. For the Maratha people, who had served in the armies of both Vijayanagara and the Sultanates, the Battle of Talikota and its aftermath created new opportunities. The collapse of Vijayanagara authority in the Western Deccan left a power vacuum that ambitious Maratha families would gradually fill. The Deccan Sultanates, weakened by their constant warfare and increasingly threatened by the expanding Mughal Empire to the north, would come to rely ever more heavily on Maratha military commanders and administrators. Let us linger now in the courts of these sultanates, for in the decades following Talikota, they would produce some of the most remarkable cultural achievements in Indian history. The courts of Bijapur and Golconda became centers of artistic and literary production, where Persian and Indian traditions mingled to create something entirely new. Imagine the workshops of Bijapur in the late 16th century, the soft scratch of reed pens on handmade paper, the patient grinding of pigments derived from minerals and plants, the quiet concentration of master painters, creating images that blended Persian elegance with Indian vitality. The miniature paintings produced in these courts displayed a distinctive Deccani style, more lyrical and fantastical than the naturalistic Mughal tradition, with audacious use of colour and a dreamlike quality that set them apart. Where Mughal painters sought to capture the world as it appeared to the eye, Deccani artists created visions of the world as it might be imagined in a poet's reverie. Gold leaf shimmered against deep purples and greens. Figures floated in gardens where every flower seemed to glow with inner light. Portraits captured not just the features of their subjects, but something of their inner essence, their moods and aspirations. The architecture of the Sultanates spoke to the same creative synthesis. In Bijapur, the Gol Gumbaz rose above the city, its massive dome, the second largest in the world after St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, spanning nearly 44 meters. Within that dome, a remarkable acoustic phenomenon, the Whispering Gallery, where the softest whisper spoken at one end could be heard clearly at the other, the sound travelling around the curved surface in a gentle embrace. Visitors would stand in wonder, speaking quietly to friends across the vast space, their words carried by the mathematics of the dome's perfect geometry. Nearby stood the Ibrahim Ruza, the tomb of Ibrahim Adil Shah II, a building of such delicate beauty that it was said to have inspired the Taj Mahal. Its slender minarets, its intricate stone latticework, its perfect proportions, all spoke to a refined aesthetic sensibility that prized elegance over grandeur, subtlety over spectacle. The Persian inscription on its walls described it as a garden of paradise, and indeed, approaching it through the morning mist, with the calls of birds in the surrounding trees, one might believe oneself transported to some celestial realm. Golconda, meanwhile, had become famous throughout the world for its diamonds. The mines of the region, Kalur, Paritala, Atkur, produced stones of legendary quality, including what would later be known as the Hope Diamond and the Koh-i-Noor. Merchants from across the globe made their way to Golconda's markets, where rough stones were sorted and graded, where fortunes were made and lost in a single transaction. The wealth that flowed from these mines funded the Sultanates' ambitious building projects, its patronage of poets and musicians, its maintenance of a sophisticated court culture. The rulers of Golconda were themselves remarkable figures. Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah, who reigned from 1580 to 1612, was not only a capable administrator, but also a poet of genuine talent, composing verses in Telugu, Dakhni Urdu, and Persian. He founded the city of Hyderabad in 1591, laying it out according to careful geometric principles, with the iconic Charminar, the four minarets, at its center. The city was designed to be beautiful, with wide streets, elegant buildings, and gardens that brought greenery into the urban landscape. It was also designed to be functional, with a sophisticated water supply system that brought fresh water to the public fountains throughout the city. The Dakhni language that flourished in these sultanates deserves particular attention, for it represented a remarkable linguistic synthesis. Dakhni was a form of Urdu that had developed in the Deccan, absorbing vocabulary and idioms from Marathi, Telugu, Kannada, and other local languages. It was the language of the streets and the bazaars, but it was also the language of some of the finest poetry of the age. The poets of Bijapur and Golconda composed ghazals, lyric poems exploring themes of love, loss, and spiritual longing in Dakhni, creating a literary tradition that was distinctly southern, distinctly Deccani, yet connected to the broader Persian-influenced culture of the Islamic world. Music, too, flourished in the Sultanate courts. The rulers of Bijapur were particularly devoted patrons of music, and their courts attracted performers from across India. The Deccani musical tradition blended Hindustani classical forms with local folk traditions, creating a distinctive style that emphasized emotional expression and improvisational freedom. The evening concerts in the palaces of Bijapur, with oil lamps casting soft light on the gathered courtiers, with the slow unfolding of a raga as the night deepened, these were moments of refined pleasure that the Sultanate elite treasured. But even as the Sultanates flourished culturally, the political ground was shifting beneath them. The Mughal Empire, under the great Emperor Akbar, was consolidating its power in northern India and would soon turn its attention southward. Akbar's vision of empire was comprehensive. He sought not merely to conquer, but to integrate, to create a unified political structure that would embrace the subcontinent's diversity within a single administrative framework. The Deccan Sultanates, with their wealth, their strategic position, and their independent spirit, represented both an opportunity and a challenge to this imperial vision. And in the hills of the Western Deccan, another force was gathering strength. The Maratha warriors, who had learned their craft in Sultanate service, were beginning to develop their own political ambitions. They had served as soldiers and administrators, as fort commanders and revenue collectors. They knew the terrain of the Deccan intimately, every hill fort, every mountain pass, every river crossing. They had absorbed the military innovations of the Sultanates, the administrative techniques of the Mughals, and the guerrilla traditions of their own hill country. Soon, they would apply those lessons to build an empire of their own. An empire that would challenge both the Deccan Sultanates and the Mughal Colossus to the north. The stage was being set for the next great transformation of Deccani politics. The fragmentation that had followed the Bahmani collapse, the cultural flowering of the successor sultanates, the catastrophic fall of Vijayanagara, all of these were preludes to the drama that would unfold in the 17th century. New actors were waiting in the wings, and the greatest of them was not yet born. In a small hill fort in the western Deccan, a family of Maratha administrators was rising to prominence in the service of the Ahmednagar Sultanate. Their name was Bhonsle, and their most famous son would change the history of India forever. Chapter 4. The Ethiopian General and the Maratha Warriors. Malik Ambar's Legacy. In the early 17th century, as the Mughal Empire under Jahangir pressed southward into the Deccan, an extraordinary figure emerged to lead the resistance. A man whose origins could not have been more distant from the Indian subcontinent, yet whose legacy would prove foundational to the rise of Maratha power. Malik Ambar, born in the highlands of Ethiopia around 1548, sold into slavery as a child and eventually brought to India, would become the de facto ruler of the Ahmednagar Sultanate and the pioneer of the guerrilla warfare tactics that the Marathas would later perfect. The story of Malik Ambar begins in Harar, in what is now Ethiopia, where he was born with the name Chapu. Sold by his impoverished parents into the slave trade that connected East Africa to the Middle East and India, he passed through the hands of multiple owners, one of whom renamed him Ambar and converted him to Islam. Eventually he was purchased by Chengiz Khan, himself a former Habshi, the term used for Ethiopians in India, who had risen to become the chief minister of the Ahmednagar Sultanate. This pattern of African slaves rising to positions of military and political prominence in the Deccan Sultanates was well established, a consequence of the chronic instability that made culturally alien military labor valuable to rulers who could not fully trust their own nobility. After Chengiz Khan's death, Malik Ambar was freed from slavery and began to build his own military force. By the time the Ahmednagar Sultanate fell into crisis following the Mughal annexation of its capital in 1600, Ambar had assembled a mercenary army that would grow to include 10,000 Habshis and 40,000 Deccanese. He emerged as the central figure in the resistance movement, declaring Murtaza Nizam Shah II, a minor heir, as Sultan and assuming the office of Chief Minister and Regent. For the next quarter century, until his death in 1626, Malik Ambar would be the effective ruler of what remained of the Ahmednagar Sultanate, frustrating every Mughal attempt to complete the conquest of the Deccan. Malik Ambar's military genius lay in his development of guerrilla warfare tactics that neutralized the Mughals' advantages in numbers and heavy cavalry. He pioneered what came to be called Baji Giri, rapid cavalry raids, ambushes, and strategic retreats that denied the Mughals the set-piece battles they preferred. His forces used their intimate knowledge of the Deccan terrain, its hills, forests, and seasonal rivers, to strike at Mughal supply lines, harass their armies, and melt away before superior forces could be brought to bear. The smoke of campfires in guerrilla encampments hidden in the Western Ghats, the rustle of intelligence reports being passed between Maratha scouts. These were the sounds of a new kind of warfare being born. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir's frustration with Malik Ambar is palpable in his memoirs. Jahangir never mentions Malik Ambar without prefixing epithets like wretch, cursed fellow, and black-faced slave. This vitriolic language reflects not just personal animosity, but a deeper frustration with an enemy who refused to fight on Mughal terms, who melted away before superior forces only to strike when least expected, who could not be pinned down or decisively defeated. To place Malik Ambar's career in global context, his death in 1626 came the same year as Francis Bacon, the English philosopher often called the father of the scientific method. Just 8 years earlier, in 1618, the 30 Years' War had begun in Central Europe with the defenestration of Prague, sparking a conflict that would eventually kill an estimated 4.5 to 8 million people. The Pilgrims had landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620, just 6 years before Malik Ambar's death. The world was entering an age of transformation, and Malik Ambar's innovations in guerrilla warfare were part of a broader pattern of military revolution that was reshaping how wars were fought. But Malik Ambar's significance for our story lies not merely in his own achievements, but in the military tradition he helped to create and the Maratha commanders he trained. The Maratha chiefs who served under Malik Ambar, Lakhuji Jadavrao, Maloji Bhonsle, and Maloji's son, Shaji Bhonsle, gained invaluable experience in the mobile warfare that would later become the hallmark of Maratha military power. These men learned to fight in the Deccan's difficult terrain, to maintain cavalry forces that could move faster than their enemies, and to exploit the political divisions among their opponents. Maloji Bhonsle, the grandfather of the great Shivaji, rose to prominence in Malik Ambar's service. He was granted Jagirs, land assignments, in the Pune region, establishing the territorial base that his descendants would transform into the nucleus of an empire. His son, Shaji Bhonsle, would become one of the most important Maratha military commanders of the 17th century, serving at various times the Ahmadnagar Sultanate, the Bijapur Sultanate, and even the Mughal Empire, always seeking to advance his family's interests in the turbulent politics of the Deccan. The relationship between Malik Ambar and the Maratha chiefs was symbiotic. Ambar needed the Marathas' knowledge of the local terrain, their connections to the rural population, and their cavalry skills. The Marathas, in turn, gained military training, political experience, and the opportunity to accumulate wealth and power. With the help of these Maratha chiefs, Malik Ambar captured the Ahmadnagar fort and town from the Mughals in 1610, demonstrating what a combination of guerrilla tactics and local knowledge could achieve against a far more powerful enemy. Malik Ambar's administrative reforms were equally significant. He carried out a systematic revenue settlement of major portions of the Deccan, creating the framework that would later be adopted by the Marathas themselves. His emphasis on efficient revenue collection, on maintaining the agricultural productivity of the land, and on balancing the interests of cultivators and the state would influence Deccan administration for generations. When Shivaji later developed his own revenue system, he drew explicitly on the model that Malik Ambar had established. The city of Khadki, which Malik Ambar founded in 1610 and which would later be renamed Aurangabad by the Mughal emperor, stands as a monument to his vision. He constructed an elaborate canal system, the Nehar-e-Ambar, that brought water to the city, the cool water flowing through the streets, demonstrating his concern for urban infrastructure and public welfare. This was not merely a military commander, but a statesman who understood that lasting power required more than battlefield victories. Malik Ambar died in 1626, at the age of approximately 77. His death marked the beginning of the end for the Ahmadnagar Sultanate, which would be formally annexed by the Mughals in 1636. But his legacy lived on in the military traditions he had established and the Maratha commanders he had trained. A noted historian observed that Malik Ambar, who was a great master of the art of guerrilla warfare as Shivaji himself, stands at the head of the builders of the Maratha nationality. His primary object was to serve the interest of his own master, but unconsciously he nourished into strength a power which more than avenged the injuries of the south on the northern power. The Marathas who had served under Malik Ambar carried forward his military innovations. They understood that the Deccan's terrain favoured mobile warfare over the heavy cavalry charges that dominated warfare in the northern plains. They had learned to build and defend hill forts, to maintain intelligence networks among the rural population, and to exploit the political divisions among their enemies. These lessons, absorbed in the service of the Ahmadnagar Sultanate, would be applied with devastating effect when the Marathas began their own bid for power under Shivaji. The Watandari system, the network of hereditary local officials who collected revenue and maintained order at the village and district level, provided the institutional framework through which Maratha power would eventually be exercised. The Deshmukhs and Patils, the Deshpans and Kulkarnis, who had served the Bahmani Sultanate and its successors, would become the administrative backbone of the Maratha state. Many of these officials were themselves Marathas, and their local knowledge and administrative experience would prove invaluable when Shivaji began to construct his own kingdom. As the 17th century progressed, the stage was being set for the emergence of Maratha power. The Deccan Sultanates were weakening, exhausted by their constant warfare with each other, and increasingly threatened by Mughal expansion. The Mughal Empire itself, though at the height of its territorial extent, was beginning to show signs of the overextension that would eventually prove fatal. And in the hills and valleys of the Western Deccan, a new generation of Maratha leaders was coming of age, ready to seize the opportunities that the changing political landscape would provide. Chapter 5. The Sounds of Civilization. Daily life in the Sultanate world. Far from the battlefields and the intrigues of court, the civilization of the Deccan Sultanates unfolded in the daily rhythms of cities and villages, in the sounds of craftsmen at their work and merchants at their trade, in the prayers of the faithful and the songs of the devoted. To understand the world that produced the Marathas, we must leave behind the chronicles of kings and generals and enter the lived experience of ordinary people, the weavers and metal workers, the farmers and soldiers, the pilgrims and poets who gave this civilization its distinctive character. The Sultanate city awakened before dawn, to the muezzin's call to prayer rising from the minarets and rippling outward across the sleeping streets like a stone dropped into still water. This was the sound that began every day, a sound that would have been utterly foreign to this landscape just a few centuries before, when the region was ruled by Hindu dynasties and the dawn was marked instead by temple bells and the chanting of Vedic hymns. But the Deccan of the 16th and 17th centuries was a place of layered sounds, where the sonic worlds of Persia, Central Asia, and India had mingled into something entirely new. As the sky lightened from black to grey to the pale gold of a Deccan morning, the city stirred to life, and its soundscape unfolded like a symphony of human activity. From the royal quarter came the distant rumble of drums, the nakara, those great kettle drums that announced the Sultan's waking and marked the hours of the day. The drum house was an essential institution of Sultanate governance, its rhythms structuring time itself for the city's inhabitants. When the drums fell silent, something was wrong. When they thundered in rapid succession, news, good or ill, was about to be proclaimed. In the metalworkers' quarter, the tap, tap, tap of hammers on copper and brass created a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Here, craftsmen were perfecting the distinctive metalware known as bidraware, that elegant art of inlaying silver into blackened zinc alloy that had been developed under Bahmani patronage. The sound of metal being worked was punctuated by the hiss of hot metal being quenched in water, the scrape of files smoothing rough edges, and the low murmur of masters instructing apprentices. The terminology of the craft was Persian, tarkashi for wire inlay, tynishan for sheet inlay, reflecting the origins of the technique in the metalworking traditions of Iran. But the designs were distinctively Deccani, incorporating local motifs alongside Persian patterns, Hindu symbols mingling with Islamic arabesques. In the textile quarter, the clatter of looms filled the air, that distinctive thump and slide of the shuttle being thrown across the warp, the creak of the heddles rising and falling. Cotton was king in the Deccan, and the black soil of the plateau produced fibres of exceptional quality. Weavers worked in the cool shadows of their workshops, their feet working the treadles, while their hands guided the shuttle with practiced ease. Some workshops specialized in kalamkari, painted and printed textiles that combined Persian floral motifs with local traditions. The kalamkari artists worked in near silence, their concentration absolute. But the preparation of their materials created its own soundscape. The grinding of mordants, the bubbling of dye vats, the splash of fabric being rinsed in running water. The colours were the colours of the Deccan itself. The deep red of madder root, the blue of indigo, the yellow of turmeric. The market streets were a cacophony of commerce. Vendors called out their wares in a babel of languages, Persian for the educated elite, Dakhni for the common people, Marathi and Kannada for the local populations who had lived here for generations. The Dakhni language itself was a sound map of the Deccan's cultural mixing. Hindi vocabulary from the north, Persian and Arabic loanwords from the Islamic world, Marathi and Kannada influences from the local populations, all blended into something distinctively Deccany. The food markets assaulted the senses with both sound and smell. The sizzle of meat being grilled on open fires, the thump of dough being kneaded for naan, the crackle of spices being dry roasted before grinding. But perhaps the most remarkable sounds of the Sultanate world were those of its architecture. Stand in the center of the Gol Gumbaz in Bijapur, the mausoleum of Muhammad Adil Shah, with one of the largest unsupported domes ever constructed, and whisper. Your voice, barely audible to your own ears, will travel around the circumference of the Great Dome and return to you from the opposite side, amplified and clarified, as if spoken by a ghost. This is the famous Whispering Gallery, one of the acoustic wonders of the world. Clap your hands, and the sound will echo 7 times, bouncing back and forth between the walls until it finally fades into silence. The dome's perfect hemispherical shape focuses sound waves, allowing whispers to travel around its circumference with minimal loss of energy. The effect is uncanny, almost magical. The wealth that funded these architectural marvels came in large part from the diamond trade. In the mines of Kollur, along the banks of the Krishna River, the rhythmic scrape of shovels against gravel filled the air from dawn to dusk. 30,000 workers, men, women, and children, labored in the alluvial pits, sifting through the earth in search of stones that would travel to the courts of Europe and the treasuries of Asian emperors. Until the 1720s, India was the world's only significant source of diamonds, giving the Deccan a global monopoly on brilliance. The great diamonds of history came from these pits: the Koh-i-Noor, the Hope Diamond, the Regent. French traveller Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who visited the mines in the 1660s, reported that the Kollur mine alone employed 60,000 workers at its peak. In the courts of the sultans, particularly in Bijapur under Ibrahim Adil Shah II, the sounds of artistic creation filled the palace halls. Ibrahim was no ordinary ruler. He was an accomplished musician who cradled the tampura in his arms and composed his own songs, a poet who wrote in Dakhni, a patron whose court attracted artists and scholars from across the Islamic world. The sustained drone of the tampura's 4 strings, the intricate melodic patterns of the sitar, the soaring vocals of classical singers exploring the microtonal nuances of Indian ragas. These sounds mingled with the music of Persia and Central Asia. The haunting melodies of the ney flute, the driving rhythms of the daf drum. Ibrahim's compositions collected in his work, the Kitab-i-Naras, the Book of 9 Rasas, those emotional essences that form the foundation of Indian aesthetic theory, opened with invocations to Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of learning and music. He claimed divine parentage, calling Ganapati his father and Saraswati his mother. This was a Muslim sultan singing praises to Hindu deities, demonstrating a syncretic sensibility that transcended religious boundaries. His court poet Zuhuri, lured all the way from Isfahan, wrote a Persian introduction to this collection of Dakhni verses, demonstrating the equal standing of the 2 literary traditions at the Bijapur court. Far from the cities, in the villages of the western Deccan, a different soundscape prevailed. The Maratha village awakened before dawn to the crowing of roosters and the lowing of cattle. The first sounds of the day were domestic, the splash of water being drawn from the well, the crackle of cooking fires being lit, the rhythmic thump of the grinding stone as women prepared the morning meal. The village was organized around the institution of the patil, the hereditary headman who served as the link between the community and the state. The patil's responsibilities were extensive. He collected revenue from the villagers and forwarded it to the higher authorities. He maintained law and order. He settled disputes. He represented the village in dealings with the outside world. Religion permeated every aspect of Maratha life. The sound of temple bells marked the hours of worship, and the chanting of priests accompanied the daily rituals. The Bhakti movement, that great wave of devotional Hinduism that emphasized direct personal devotion to God, had found fertile ground in Maharashtra. The songs of the saint poets, Dinyaneshwar, Namdev, Eknath and Tukaram, were sung in homes and temples, their message of divine love transcending the boundaries of caste and learning. The pilgrimage to Pandharpur, where the god Vithoba was worshipped, drew hundreds of thousands of devotees each year, their journey marked by singing and dancing and ecstatic devotion. But the Marathas also served Muslim sultans, and this service had created a complex cultural relationship. Many Maratha nobles had adopted Persian titles and customs, their courts mimicking in miniature the courts of their sultanate overlords. The language of administration was often Persian, and Marathi itself had absorbed thousands of Persian and Arabic loanwords. The boundaries between communities were more porous than later nationalist narratives would suggest, and the Deccan of the 16th and 17th centuries was a place of cultural mixing and exchange. As the sun set over the western hills, the sounds of the village changed. The cattle were brought in from the fields, their bells jingling as they ambled toward their buyers. Cooking fires were lit, and the smell of food, rice and dal, vegetables and pickles, drifted through the evening air. Families gathered for the evening meal, sitting on the floor around a common plate. After dinner there might be storytelling, tales of gods and heroes, of battles and romances, or music, the simple songs of the countryside sung to the accompaniment of a single-stringed instrument. This was the world that made the Marathas, a world of villages and forts, of farming and fighting, of Hindu devotion and sultanate service. Chapter 6. The Crucible of Power. Shaji Bhonsle and the Dawn of Maratha Independence. On the 6th of April 1627, in the hill fortress of Shivneri near Junar, where the cool mountain air carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant call of eagles, a son was born to Shaji Bhonsle and his wife Jijabai. They named the boy Shivaji after the local goddess Shivai, and in that naming lay a portent of the transformation that was to come. But to understand the world into which Shivaji was born and the foundations upon which he would build his empire, we must first understand his father, Shaji Bhonsle, the Maratha general whose career epitomized the complex, shifting loyalties of the Deccan in the 17th century. Shaji Bhonsle was born on the 15th of March, 1594, the son of Maloji Bhonsle, a Maratha warrior who had risen to prominence in the service of the Ahmednagar Sultanate under Malik Ambar. When Maloji died, Shaji inherited both his father's position and his Jagirs, the land assignments in the Pune region that would become the territorial nucleus of Maratha power. He also inherited his father's place in the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized Deccan politics, and he would spend his entire career navigating these treacherous waters. Shaji's early career was spent in the service of the Ahmednagar Sultanate, where he became the right-hand man of Malik Ambar. He participated in the Battle of Batwadi in 1624, where Malik Ambar's forces defeated a combined Mughal-Bijapur army, demonstrating the effectiveness of the guerrilla tactics that the Marathas had learned under their Ethiopian commander. But the death of Malik Ambar in 1626 and the subsequent decline of the Ahmednagar Sultanate forced Shahji to seek new patrons. What followed was a career of remarkable complexity, as Shahji shifted his allegiance between the Ahmednagar Sultanate, the Bijapur Sultanate, and the Mughal Empire, always seeking to advance his family's interests in the turbulent politics of the Deccan. The 1630s were years of crisis. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan launched a determined campaign to complete the conquest that his predecessors had begun, and the weakened Ahmednagar Sultanate could not withstand the onslaught. Between 1630 and 1632, northern Maharashtra was devastated by the Mahadurga famine, adding natural disaster to the miseries of war. In 1632, the Mughals captured Daulatabad, and the Sultanate's effective independence came to an end. But Shahji Bhonsle refused to accept defeat. In a remarkable display of determination, he attempted to keep the Ahmednagar Sultanate alive, placing a young Nizamshahi prince on the throne at the fort of Pemgiri and carrying on the administration in his name. For 4 years, from 1633 to 1636, Shahji maintained this resistance, raiding Mughal territories with a force of up to 12,000 troops and demonstrating the guerrilla tactics he had learned under Malik Ambar. That a minor Jagirdar should dare to challenge the might of Shah Jahan testified to Shahji's self-confidence and resourcefulness. But the odds were overwhelming. In 1636, Bijapur signed a peace treaty with the Mughals, agreeing to help subjugate Shahji or depute him away from the Mughal frontier. Surrounded and outnumbered, Shahji surrendered the forts of Mahuli and Junar to the Mughals and entered the service of Bijapur. The Mughals now controlled the major part of present-day Maharashtra, including Pune and Indapur. Shahji was allowed to retain his Jagir in the Pune region, but was barred from living there as part of the treaty terms. This arrangement would prove fateful. Shahji sent his wife Jijabai and their younger son Shivaji to Pune to manage his Jagir, while he himself remained in the south, serving Bijapur in its campaigns in Karnataka. In 1638, Shahji led a Bijapur army that defeated Kempe Gowda III, and Bangalore was given to him as a Jagir. He had effectively created 2 power bases, one in the Pune region under Jijabai and Shivaji, and one in Karnataka under his own direct control. The significance of this arrangement cannot be overstated. By placing Shivaji in the Pune region, far from the direct supervision of either the Mughals or Bijapur, Shahji created the conditions in which his son could begin to carve out an independent domain. The young Shivaji, raised by his mother Jijabai and guided by the administrator Dadaji Kondev, grew up in a region that was politically unstable, where the authority of distant overlords was weak, and where ambitious men could build power through a combination of military skill and political cunning. The hill forts of the Western Deccan, perched on rocky outcrops, accessible only by narrow paths that wound up steep slopes, were the strongholds of Maratha power. Their walls were built of local stone, following the contours of the terrain, and their water supplies, tanks and cisterns carved into the rock, could sustain a garrison through months of siege. The forts had names that would echo through Maratha history: Raigad, Pratapgad, Sinagad, Purandar. In the 17th century, many of these forts were held by Maratha commanders in Sultanate service, their garrisons a mix of Maratha soldiers and troops from other communities. But they were also potential bases for independence, and Shivaji would soon begin to seize them one by one. Shahji's career in Bijapur was distinguished. He led the Sultanates' armies to many victories against the Rajas of southern India, and he was known for his magnanimity toward defeated enemies, a quality that earned him their loyalty and support. Muhammad Adil Shah, the Sultan of Bijapur, trusted him implicitly, calling him a son and pillar of the state. But Shahji's position was always precarious, dependent on the favor of rulers who might at any moment turn against him. This precariousness became evident when Shivaji began his own career of conquest in the Pune region. Starting in 1645, the young Shivaji began capturing forts and territory that nominally belonged to Bijapur, alarming the Sultanates' authorities. Muhammad Adil Shah, suspecting that Shahji was encouraging his son's activities, had him arrested and imprisoned. 2 expeditions were sent against Shivaji and his elder brother Sambhaji, but both were defeated. Fearing another Mughal campaign against Bijapur, Muhammad Adil Shah released Shahji from prison, but the elder brother Sambhaji was killed during an expedition, a death that Shivaji would later avenge in dramatic fashion. Shahji died on the 23rd of January, 1664, from injuries sustained in a hunting accident near Hodigera in Karnataka. He was approximately 70 years old, and he had spent his entire adult life navigating the treacherous politics of the Deccan. His legacy was complex. He had served multiple masters, shifted his allegiances repeatedly, and never achieved the independent kingdom that may have been his ultimate ambition. But he had preserved and expanded his family's position, trained his sons in the arts of war and politics, and created the conditions in which Shivaji could build something far greater than anything Shahji himself had achieved. The world that Shahji left behind was one in which the old order was crumbling. The Deccan Sultanates, weakened by their constant warfare and increasingly threatened by Mughal expansion, were entering their final decades. The Mughal Empire, though still formidable, was beginning to show the strains of overextension that would eventually prove fatal. And in the hills of the Western Deccan, Shivaji was building a new kind of power, a Maratha kingdom that would draw upon the military traditions, the administrative structures, and the political experience that generations of Maratha service in the Sultanates had accumulated. The Deccan Cauldron had been simmering for 3 centuries, since the founding of the Bahmani Sultanate in 1347. The Bahmani fragmentation, the rise of the successor sultanates, the Battle of Talikota, the resistance of Malik Ambar, the career of Shahji Bhonsle, all of these had been preparing the ground for what was to come. The Marathas had learned to fight in the Sultanates' armies, to administer in their bureaucracies, to navigate the complex politics of a region where power was always contested and alliances were always shifting. Now, under Shivaji, they would apply these lessons to build an empire of their own. As the evening shadows lengthened over the western Ghats and the last light of day painted the hill forts in shades of gold and amber, a new chapter in the history of the Deccan was about to begin. The Maratha people, who had served so many masters over so many generations, were preparing to become masters themselves. The skills they had acquired in warfare, in administration, in the subtle arts of diplomacy and intrigue, would serve them well in the struggles to come. And the memory of what they had learned, of the civilization they had helped to build, and the traditions they had absorbed, would shape the empire they would create. The story of the Deccan Sultanates, of Mahmud Gawan and his reforms, of Talikota and its destruction, of Malik Ambar and his resistance, of the glittering courts of Bijapur and Golconda, is not merely a prelude to Maratha history. It is the foundation upon which Maratha power was built, the crucible in which the Maratha identity was forged. The Marathas did not emerge from nowhere. They emerged from this world of cultural synthesis and political fragmentation, of Persian poetry and Indian devotion, of diamond mines and whispering galleries, of guerrilla warfare and administrative innovation. And so, as the night settles over the Deccan Plateau and the stars emerge one by one in the vast Indian sky, we leave this world of sultanates and soldiers, of merchants and mystics, knowing that its legacy lives on. The forts still stand on their rocky outcrops, their walls weathered by centuries of monsoon rains. The tombs of the sultans still rise against the sky, their domes echoing with whispers. The songs of the saint poets are still sung in the villages of Maharashtra, their message of divine love unchanged across the centuries. And the story of the Deccan, of its triumphs and its tragedies, its beauty and its violence, its endless capacity for reinvention, continues to unfold as it has for 1,000 years, and as it will for 1,000 more. Rest now and let the sounds of this ancient land carry you gently towards sleep. The distant temple bells, the murmur of evening prayers, the soft rustle of wind through the neem trees. The Deccan keeps its vigil, as it always has, watching over the dreams of those who have called it home. And in those dreams, perhaps, the great figures of the past still walk. Mahmud Gawan with his books and his reforms, Malik Ambar with his cavalry and his cunning, Shaji Bhonsle with his sword and his ambition. All of them part of the vast tapestry of history that has made this land what it is, and that continues to shape what it will become. Good night.